it did in the sort of period of a quarter. Yeah, it went to zero. And then in terms of the kind of yearly income, it dropped by, like, in that first year, it probably dropped by a third.
Right.
Yeah, and then and since then it's been we've had to fight for every single, just to kind of keep it at that level. So there was me assuming it was just going to go up by 10%, 20% each year, but instead it dropped. So when it drops by a third, and you think it's going to go up by a fifth, it feels like even more, because it's like dropped below your target. Where you are below your target is even more. So it's kind of just a really painful feeling.
Welcome to Beyond the Fail, the podcast where we talk to leaders and entrepreneurs about their biggest business failures. We'll deep dive into how they overcame these setbacks, the lessons they learned from them, all to help you gain valuable insights. Failure is an essential part of the business journey, as well as being the key to success. So we're here to show you how to thrive from it. Andrew, thanks for being here today. So what led you to, I suppose, start your first business?
I was working for a consultancy, product strategy consultancy, doing projects with really big clients, so huge technology companies from around the world, really high profile projects on looking at the future, looking at what they should be doing in 10 to 15 years time. A super exciting thing to do in your first job. But it was all very political and very slow moving, and it's 15 years time. And so we were never going to see whether or not we were right or we were wrong. And so I started hankering to work on things that were a bit more still strategic, but a bit more short term. And this was about 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And London, the startup scene in London was popping back then. It was so much, especially financial technology, fintech. I had friends who had founded companies, joined companies, and it was just such an exciting time. And I really felt like we should work with startups. And so I pestered my boss that, perhaps we should start selling services to startups. And he just felt it was not a reliable, for good reason, not a reliable source of revenue for a company that normally works with bigger corporates. And so a friend and I just decided that we would start a company that primarily works with startups. And it was going to be called Zombie Labs. And my friend was a designer. He was going to do digital design. I was a researcher and strategist. I was going to do more kind of strategic work behind the scenes, informing that design.
Interesting. So I suppose one thing that intrigued me was what does it involve trying to predict the future? And are you on a sort of hiding to nothing? Can you win in that situation?
I think you can, because really, you can't predict the future. You can have a point of view on where you think things are going. And if you're a giant company like the clients that I had in my first job, then you actually have quite a significant influence on the future. And so if there's something you want to focus on, the technology you want to make a bet on, then if you're pointing in a direction that really fits the way that society technology is going, then you can influence that future. And so it's about having a very smart point of view about where things seem to be going, what the directions are that we can see from current behaviors, current trends, understanding the macro forces that are evolving, and then creating something that fits that's gonna respond to that need in the future. But it's hard, and a lot of companies get it wrong, time and time again. So it's definitely not an exact science.
And is this mainly sort of new technology, or is it where technology might go?
Yeah, so it was the clients that I was working with were mainly consumer technology clients, and we would be tracking trends. There'd be massive social trends like aging populations, or new types of mobility emerging, and we would be thinking about what are going to be the opportunities that emerge in the future when we hit certain thresholds. When a percentage of the population is above a certain age, there's going to be a need for more healthcare support. It's going to be a need for different types of support that are maybe a bit more, like have a bit more thinking behind them, than just an old folks' home, for example. You're being in the old days. If you were above, 65 or 70, you're considered, an old person. But actually, you have those people who are 65 who are running marathons nowadays and running businesses and extremely tech savvy. And so, these are the kinds of trends that we are tracking and saying, actually, those people are going to need a much more sophisticated, set of products and solutions when they are between 65 and 75 than what we've thought of previously.
Is there one prediction that you can think of that you have made that you are really proud of, or that you've got, completely right?
I did make a prediction that during my PhD, I made a prediction that mobile phones are going to stay boring forever until we remove the need for a SIM card. And because having a SIM card means that people can really only have one phone, one device.
Okay.
If you want to have one number, then you can only have one SIM card and you can only have one device. And my view was that means that if you had virtual SIM cards, people would actually have multiple devices, and then phones would start to look a lot more interesting. And sure enough, eventually when the eSIM came along, and now you can have an Apple Watch, you can have a phone that's a watch. And so that was the kind of future that I was predicting, was that actually, you could have phones for very specific situations that are not strong in all situations. Whereas until that point, when you have one phone, then the sort of iPhone form factor, the rectangle, the boring rectangle, is the best compromise. It's the best all-round solution for most situations. But it's actually not great if you're mountain biking or if you make loads of phone calls because that's your business. But it's not or if you're typing loads of emails compared to a BlackBerry, it's not that great for typing. But it's better in other ways. So so that was quite a prediction I made, and maybe years and years ago I should have started an eSIM campaign or something, but you can always look back.
That's a very good crystal ball that you've got. I did wonder what you meant by boring, but you meant boring in design.
Yeah. Boring as in just a rectangle that is essentially everything, all of the physical, all of the industrial design is out of the way. It's just and it's all about digital design from that point on.
Is there any predictions that you made when you've been completely wrong?
I mean, predictions about my own business, maybe. Probably those are the ones that, they're the ones that have hurt the most. But yeah, not for clients. No, I've not. There's been kind of, you do so much, you go through so many rounds. But by the time you submit the report, it's all quite vanilla, because it is a logical progression from where we are now. So it's unlikely you're going to have something that's so completely wrong, or I can't talk about it because it's confidential.
Yeah, no, I thought you might say that one. So I'm intrigued as well. You obviously sound very academic. You've gone for a PhD and got your doctorate and things, and then now you're obviously in the entrepreneurial space. Those two things don't always kind of go together. How did you go from one to the other? And when you were at university or when you were even younger before that, was entrepreneurship something that you ever thought about?
No, it didn't really come up. It was really being immersed in it in London in the kind of early 2010s that gave me the bug. I think up until that point, I'd always thought I would be working for someone else, in either in a consultancy or in-house as a designer or strategist. I did my internship during my degree for Gillette, designing razors for them, and I could definitely have seen myself be on a design team designing consumer products in later life. So yeah, it really came to me while being in London and just seeing normal people that I'm friends with or went to university with, starting up companies, and it just being wildly exciting. And then that started to give me this idea that actually it was attainable, and and it was worth a shot while I was young.
What did you see amongst that community and those businesses that really attracted you towards it? Was it the ping pong tables or big stuff?
Not so much ping pong tables. More of a table football guy. But yeah, I think it's a lot about the rules and that actually a lot of the rules that I think there's a Steve Jobs quote somewhere about rules were made up by someone who may or may not be as clever as you. It's just a human wrote those rules, and that those no rules are actually that perfect, and so they can be broken. You can push the boundaries, and so I think that inspired me. I think working for myself, building something for myself, and not having a boss, I think also appealed to me. Although I was perhaps a bit arrogant in that thought process. I think there's lots of learning you can get from working with someone senior to you, and sometimes when you're in your 20s, you can you think you know everything, and actually you don't. But I think sometimes you have to quit your job and start a company to learn that. Like it can be written in so many books, or it can be given to you as advice by so many relatives, but ultimately there's so many things you just have to live to learn from, and then you start to build your gut, and you get that sense of what gives you and good energy. When do you trust yourself, or when are you like talking yourself into something?
And talk us through that transition from working for someone else and starting your own company with your friend. How long did that decision-making process take? When did you decide to quit? Did you, because people do that transition differently. Some people are very cautious, have 6 months earnings saved in the bank to, how did you do it?
So my friend and I, we had been doing events and projects together for years anyway. And so we had a creative collective called Shell Suit Zombie, and it was a bunch of young creative people. We would get sponsors to help us to put on events, and we would spend all the sponsorship money on, no one would get paid. We'd just spend all the sponsorship money on beers or cameras, and run events in areas in music festivals. We did print magazines. We had a website blog, these kinds of things. And so we had this kind of thing going, this side hustle going. And one of the repeat sponsors for that was a company called 55 DSL, which is a street band part of Diesel. And they had more and more for us to do, and they were just starting to get to a point where there was so much that they wanted us to do for them that was helping support their brand, that they weren't quite happy for us to be doing it sort of just on evenings and weekends. And so we did have that one client, a sort of core client that we knew that there was a pipeline of work coming up. There were events to run, there was a website to build, there was bits and pieces to do for them. And so we knew there was that as a starting point, but we didn't have a huge pipeline of work beyond that. We were quite kind of schmoozy in London, so there was lots of leads, lots of connections, and we both lived in London. And Johnny had a bike, I had a Santander bike key, and so costs. I was living with my brother. He was giving me mates rates on the rent, so we had very low costs, and it was a perfect time to just try something. And worst case, go crawling back to try and get a job a year later. And best case, we build an interesting agency out of it.
And what were your, I suppose, initial kind of plans when you started it? Did you want to go big in it? Did you see a kind of big kind of market for your services?
Yeah, I think our intention was that we would grow to a point where we would hire more people, and it would become a significant agency in London. We'd seen other cool agencies, digital agencies in London. Us Too is a very cool agency here, and that was really starting to do interesting things around about that time. And so we thought maybe we could be like them. There was also, we were quite connected to the advertising industry, and so there was lots of agencies that we'd gone to their parties and been vaguely involved. And so there was just a lot of they've got a good table football as well. So there was lots of agencies that inspired us, and we liked the idea of hiring and growing at that time.
And once you kind of started it, what kind of traction or success did you sort of see in those early days?
Pretty good. So we'd started to get a lot of design and build projects coming through. So people wanted websites, and they were typically interesting websites with where there was some strategy needed. There was it might be a website attached to events. It might be it was multimodal kind of projects. And we also did events and print and things like that. We were very keen to attract these kind of multimedia type works. So those were coming in. We both were attracting and selling and bringing in work. And so traction was good. Seemed like we were going in the right direction.
And what were your kind of roles? How did you divvy up the work?
So my friend, as a designer, he was doing a lot of the creative work, and if we were building stuff, then he would also be managing the build. So we would work with third-party developers to build the sites. I was doing more of the strategy. So if there's any planning or research that was needed, then I would do that. When there wasn't, there was probably less work for me than for him. So a lot of the time I ended up doing more of the kind of running of the company. So a lot of the kind of financial admin. I would also do a lot of the selling. So preparing for pitches and just kind of managing the the relationship with clients as well.
So you were kind of more ops, and he was in some ways more the delivery.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Because when you were talking earlier about website building, I was like, where does your research skills come into this? And they're predicting the future kind of thing. Was that part of your services, or
it was reduced? That part of my my skills were reduced. I think there's a big part of the strategic work which involves research, and there were projects where we were required to research, and so I was able to run that and do that in an organized way. But certainly, a lot of the focus was on the delivery, on the design, and on the sort of creative execution. rather than on my skills.
Was that frustrating?
I think at the time I didn't realize it was frustrating, but I think that I was starting to realize that everything relied on my business partner, and it wasn't super clear what my role was. Was this an even partnership? And we had a 50-50 stake in the business, and so so it was an uneasy feeling.
And what did that unease look like? How did that manifest? Did that come out at all? And like, did that come out in meetings with him at all? Or?
I think that there were times when I'd be doing the accounts and whatever other admin, and that would the less glamorous stuff, and that would be, it would just feel like, sort of less strategically a part of what we were doing. But I also felt that it was necessary. And, sometimes you have to, there's always going to be parts of running a business that are less fun and less creative, but they're still essential, and that's part of jobs. So I don't think it massively got me down at the time.
Did you ever feel like undervalued? Like, this isn't, what I went to, did a doctorate for example? Or this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I, saw the glamorous life of these agencies, and I'm doing the finance admin.
Yeah, I think that came a bit later. I think that as he started to step away, that's when it became these sort of thoughts and feelings started to become more apparent, because it sort of changed the whole value proposition of the business if he wasn't going to be involved. And so that until that point, I don't think I'd really thought about it. I was just enjoying the ride at that time.
Yeah. And what led him to step away? What was that pull factor?
Another very good friend of mine was starting a startup, a financial technology startup, and was looking for a lead designer, employee number one lead designer, and I was like, oh, my friend might know someone who could do that, and so I introduced him, and they got talking, and then the startup friend offered a job to my business partner, and it was an amazing opportunity. It was a really really awesome business idea in a really cool space, and an amazing experience to be employee number one in something that could be a rocket ship at a time when fintech was the number one, the hottest topic in London, and there was so much investment and just so much hype. And
did they have investment?
They did, and they did subsequently. They raised loads and loads of money, and they had, it was a very the high profile business,
right?
That was that was going places, and they were they're in all of the like hot lists of fintech businesses in London.
But that must have been a bit of a kick in the teeth for you, because you started this business, you've left your job with your business, with this business partner, and obviously seems to be, kind of going in the right direction, and then he essentially gets poached to actually go into a job rather than even, to have his own business.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was a difficult moment, and it to start with, he was kind of moonlighting, so like doing bits and pieces, evenings and weekends again, to close off the projects, or there was still projects that we had, and he had an agreement with the other guy that there was still responsibilities, and so he was trying to make it work for all of us. And but certainly, though, you know, it was getting to a point where it was very hard for him to fit it in, and you know, with essentially doing two jobs, and startup work is so extremely intense and exciting in its own right. And so, yeah, really hard for him to give all of that creative energy to, you know, to both areas. And so, you know, it always felt like, you know, a struggle to get these deliverables finished and to get them, and, you know, hard explaining that timeline to the client as the sort of account manager, you know, explaining, you know, where's that design got to, you know, when's it coming?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it made being a design agency increasingly difficult, to the point where eventually he you know, we both realized that he wasn't going to be able to, you know, contribute at all, and then that left me in a situation where I had to work out what was next.
And how was that conversation when he told you that, you know, he essentially was gonna leave, or he'd been you know, essentially poached, and he was going to take their offer?
It was pretty, you know, like I genuinely think it was a good opportunity and a unique opportunity.
Would you have taken it?
I think that I might have take it. I probably would have taken it, but I probably would have taken him on a bit more of a journey of like the thought process I was on before taking it. So I mean, it's a good way of wording it, because I think that answers your previous question about, I think that it was a logical, huge opportunity, and as a friend, I definitely supported that decision, and I feel like that was a stepping stone for what has been a flourishing career for him ever since. And but as a business partner, it was a bit hard, you know, it made things challenging for sure.
And how long into your startup did this happen?
It was about 9 months in.
Right. So fairly new.
Yeah.
Where did that leave you, and what decisions did you make to which direction to take that business?
It left me in a place of kind of flux, because I needed to make money, and it still needed to, you know, pay the rent. And I guess I had a lot of uncertainty about you know, my value, and like, you know, I had all these qualifications and all of this experience, and suddenly, like, what's it all add up to? And so I had, it kind of was a difficult period, and a period of sort of soul searching, but actually, so what I ended up doing was starting just to look for bits and pieces of work, whether or not they were, you know, a perfect fit. But actually, the startup guy that poached the designer, he needed some research work to be done, paid, and he, well, actually, no, unpaid.
Oh.
But in exchange for advisor equity. And so I did some research for him on his business, and foundational research that really helped him to sort of work out what the business was, who the customer was, what the problem was they were solving, and to build a bunch of outputs that were like kind of like customer analysis, personas, different kinds of maps, the kinds of things that I would have done in my strategy job previously, and things that I find pretty easy to do. And that was based off the back of interviewing a bunch of the target customers of this business in its early days. And then he stuck them on the wall of his office, and he was in a shared office. And then all of the other startups in that shared office would be walking past, and they'd be like, "Who did your where'd you get these personas from? Who did your posters? And then that led to me doing 3 or 4 projects just with other startups in the same building as the startup that my friend went and worked for. And so by doing a bit of, helping out another friend, got a bit of advised equity. Later on, when I did work for them, it was paid. But I think CEOs do lots to try and get as much for free early on because they don't have any money to actually spend on these things. But
he wasn't satisfied that he'd poached your business partner. He just asked for some free work as well.
I mean, like the advisor equity that I received in startup terms was a lot more than later employees would have got, who did a load more work than I did, and gave a lot more of their lives than I did. So it was a very generous. If the company had been wildly successful, it would have been an extremely generous percentage. So in those terms, it was. I didn't feel too hardly done by it. I've learned about equity later in life, but that's another conversation.
So at what point did you decide what to do with this business? Where was which way did you kind of take it, and how did you come to that decision?
I realized that there is a market just for pure research, and I didn't know that existed before. It was always a part of another project. A design consultancy might do a bit of research before doing the design in order to make sure they're designing something that solves a real problem. But a lot of the time they have to persuade the client that that's even worth doing. Or a strategy agency like I worked for would be doing the research as part of understanding how things are today and, learning what are the themes and topics that maybe we want to research for predicting the future. But it's always part of a bigger thing. The idea that it could just be, you could just do research and then write up your findings and hand it over was completely new. I didn't know it existed. And it was early days for there have been kinds of researchers, lots of researchers in sort of usability researchers in tech for many, many years before. But to do this more as a kind of business and kind of discovery research, that wasn't as common. And so it was a bit of a niche. And once I worked out what that package was and what people wanted and how to build that package and how to price that package, then it turned into something that I could run, again and again for any startup that I encountered. And so that was the plan for,
And that all came from that initial period, I suppose, of the design agency not working out, and then you getting essentially kind of spontaneously getting a set of research related freelance. Is that where the grain of that idea came from?
Yeah, pretty much. And so these freelance jobs kind of snowballed and turned into, I turned into a package, a project that I could do repeatedly, and work out a way of charging that made a lot of sense for me, and started to get things back on track.
So you decided to close that other business down in the end. Was there any other options on the table? Did you ever think, I'll find another business partner, or I'll replace, because you're essentially doing design delivery work. You could just bring in another designer and you run the company. Was that ever on the cards?
I think not, because I think I discovered that there's this whole market and industry for that has me at the center of it rather than someone else. So why would I bring in someone to take that to change that balance? So yeah, it didn't make sense. The thing the two reasons why it ended were, one, that we still had a 50-50 split in the business, and so it was just a hassle to like with the accounting for me to get paid for the work that I was doing, and so all of the kind of dividend benefits that you get from being an owner of a business, we were just losing any of that kind of tax efficiency, and it was like a big hassle to change that. And it was also, although it was just kind of procedural, there's something very emotional about like removing someone from a business. And so it kind of felt easier to close it rather than to try to, shut it, switch off. Because the brand, there was some brand equity that belonged to both of us. The website was built by him. A lot of the work that defined us early on and that brought us recognition was by him. And so like, it would be difficult for me to just say like, okay, you're no longer a shareholder. And so easier to have a clean break. And then, so when one of my clients, that I was going in to try and pitch for more work, and then they said, why don't you come in and work for us, full time? Completely took me by surprise, but made so much sense. It just solved that problem. I could shut down the company. I could get some experience in another fintech startup, in another sort of exciting area, and learn a bit more, grow a bit more with the boss, and get that in-house experience up. And so that was the end of that first business.
Did you have any staff at that point?
No, we only had freelancers. So we'd bring in people as needed, but no full-time staff. No. So it was always very small.
Was there any kind of like fallout or impacts from closing that business down?
No, it was very simple because, all the projects were all finished and wrapped up. And then it was just about, just the admin of closing it down, closing the brand, and, updating the website.
I think it's a very interesting partnership story because or founder story, because I've had a lot of people on here talking about, partnerships, business partnerships, founding partners imploding essentially. And normally it's a fallout of some description, or someone, does something that's against the values of the other, or something like that. But this is quite an intriguing story that someone's head's been turned by another project. And what fascinates me about that is that, why did his head get turned? Because do you think that his heart really wasn't in that initial business? Because, I'm just thinking, as a sort of founder myself, if 9 months into a project, you're like, no, I got a better offer, mate. And it kind of feels, what do you think about that? Was his heart in it? Did you ever have any discussions about, that he wasn't really, that he was thinking about taking other opportunities? Because you said earlier you were thinking about, these other agencies, and, how you looked up to them and you wanted to be them. So you obviously had a bit of a vision there, but was he not bought into that?
We just never talked about it. Like there's so many, like, there's a lot of things that conversations that I think that you should have if you start a company with a friend. And years later, I end up hiring my cousin, so I didn't learn anything. I think if you start a company with a friend, there's lots of boundaries that you need to, set early on. There's lots of rules you need to make, principles you need to establish, which will help to protect you when things get difficult. And we didn't have any of those because I just don't think we were that mature. And so, just like I left my previous job really quickly. There was very little warning for them. I gave them the proper notice, but I didn't say like, I'm thinking about starting my own thing, like, or like, I really think it's important that I didn't push that hard on like, um, new, going after new types of clients or anything like that. I just I'd kind of made up my mind before I even, that's such a common thing. It's like the kind of rage quitting, and it's such an immature behavior, and it's awful, for bosses. I've seen it on the other side, and yeah, it's really hard for bosses because there's no warning and there's no way that they can kind of, but if you've already made up your mind, then there's nothing they can say or do because probably you've even got a job lined up or something, but you haven't raised the reason why um, you know, you're not satisfied. So yeah, he didn't, I don't think, I think we were just still working out who we are and what we were doing. And yeah, I think if that happened again in our 30s, then it would definitely feel a lot more hurtful. But I think back then it's everything's an experiment, and I think you were just like, when something that the opportunity that came along, it was an exceptional startup, um, and so I don't like, I don't have a lot of hard feelings about it. I think that, yeah, if I was to work with him or with a friend again, we would just have spent ages and in like couples therapy, like at the start, to like iron out everything, to every single kind of principle, you know, ground rules, boundaries, be much cleverer with allocation of like the fun and the less fun tasks. Much cleverer with the allocation of shares. I think we had 2 shares when we started the company. And I think that's, you much better to issue 5,000 shares, and then you can start to like, work out what you're going to do with them later. But right, if you've got 1 share each, then it's all of these things create emotional burden when they don't have to. If you haven't done it before, how are you going to know that, what you should have done?
And that couples therapy you mentioned, like, what process would you do? What practically would you do to go through? Because it obviously sounds like a conversation, and then you would have to formalize it. What steps would you kind of take?
Yeah, I mean,
Or would you advise people taking? Because that's, because there'll be people out there in this situation. I think it's a really important point.
yeah. So I am a huge advocate of principles, of establishing principles, and it's actually easier to establish principles once you've had a few bad situations. Like you can't account for everything um, at the start. You can't predict what things are going to happen and what things are going to go wrong at the very beginning of a business journey. You can definitely probably, there's things you can agree about. Openness and friendship comes first. So, what are we going to do to ensure that? There's probably some relationship principles that you can establish, but then you probably need to wait until you've done a few projects and then have proper retrospective after those projects. Not like just kind of lip service, but actually really sit down and go like, when this happened, you did this and that. The story in my head when you did that was that you devalued, my contribution. And so, I want to, what rules can we make for each other, or principles can we set that will prevent that from happening in the future? And then suddenly you start to have some proper values, not like just the ones that you could write with ChatGPT, but ones that are actually informed by usually a bad moment, but actually that bad moment led you to a realization about something that you need. And not everything you need is rational either. It might just be that like, some people, like, I don't love negative criticism. Most people don't. And so, you know, maybe you need a little bit more, sugarcoating with negative criticism than should be necessary, but that's just who you are. And so like establish that as a principle rather than just getting offended. every time it happens, and it being a thing that kind of needles away at your friendship and your relationship.
What's the difference, or in your opinion, between principles and like core values then?
So I guess like core values might be something that you have individually. And then your organization may have some values that you establish, and then principles are values are probably like single words, whereas principles are normally a sentence that are much more applicable to a certain situation.
So they're very much linked, right?
Yeah, I think they are. They're connected for sure.
So what do you think your biggest mistake was in this business closing down or ending?
There was a moment when we were about to hire someone, a junior designer. And I'm not saying this is a bit like having a baby to like save the marriage, but I think that having that mouth to feed could have changed the sort of step things up to another level in the business, made us take it up, more seriously, been less of a sort of passenger in like how the company was evolving and what projects were coming in, and being much more, well, we have to pay this person, and we also have to pay ourselves. So we're going to need this many projects per year, and suddenly it becomes a lot more serious. Whereas it's just kind of two of you, and you get broadly enough projects, you divvy it up, and it's enough to pay the rent, and you're having fun. Then it doesn't seem as as much of a professional organization. So yeah, I think there was that moment where if we'd committed, and it would have been a risk because we didn't necessarily have the pipeline to pay him constantly. But if we'd actually committed and he'd come in, full time, quit his job, come in full time, then I think that would have been a sort of pivotal moment when it would have turned us into an agency. And we do over, still very good friends with this guy. And we do over beers sort of think back to that moment as like a kind of turning point when, if we'd done that, would he have, gone off to this other thing? It would be much harder for him to step away. If we had that responsibility, and if we had, then that pipeline. So I think getting serious, getting professional, starting to, to think bigger, and not just think about, I'm just making enough to cover myself, and so therefore it's it's fine, and don't have to change anything.
And that maybe segues nicely to another kind of business setback that you want to talk about, which was client pipelines. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So fast forward 4 or 5 years later, I'd worked at a couple of startups. I had learned loads, built my network. I'm now very, very, very fluent in the world of startups, and from an in-house perspective, which makes me very capable of working with startups. They are a nightmare client for people who do research, or consultants in general, because they don't really know what they want. They change their mind. Their value proposition is actually fluid because the product might not be finished, and so what they are can change, and who their customer is can change. And so if you are not comfortable with all of that uncertainty, then you'll struggle to work with them, and they'll struggle to work with you. They won't know how to work. They won't know how to create a brief for you. And so these are all things that I was very comfortable with because I'd worked in a couple of them, and I just knew that the first brief that they would give you, you just chuck it in the bin, and then you would work on what the brief is with them. So that kind of work made sense. So I started started my own mini agency again, working with startups, also working with corporates, and other types of businesses as well. And it was going well, and I wanted to be more than just a freelancer. And so I often was juggling multiple projects at once rather than just going sort of 3 months here, 6 months here, like a contractor. And also I was regularly bringing in other people to work on projects because they were too big for me to work on. So much more of an agency feeling, and much more confident knowing how to do it from my experience before. So then I hired my cousin, who's a researcher, and she's one of my favorite cousins, and really, really fun to work with, and a really, really good researcher. And so, it was very easy to build her into the project. One of the things about researchers is they're often not great sellers. And certainly she would be the first to say she would never want to be like, knocking on doors, doing sales. And so sales was my responsibility. She would be very much the person running the projects, doing the research, doing the operations stuff on the project. I was doing a lot of the selling, and then a lot more of the kind of presenting and workshops and the showmanship of the project. And it went well. We were getting really cool clients. We worked with Mozilla, we worked with Tesco, we worked with a whole bunch of startups that you haven't heard of but are cool too. We worked with Condé Nast. And then the pandemic happened, and there was a bit of a blip. And then we went and we did some work with, we started an organization called Meals for the NHS. Myself and 3 friends, including 2 of the people in the previous story, started this thing called Meals for the NHS, and we ended up raising £1.8 million and delivering hundreds of thousands of meals to nurses and doctors around the country. And my cousin was involved in that, and was an absolute beast helping to run that. And then after
Turned out to Tesco's, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Logistics wise, yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge logistics project, all run on WhatsApp and Airtable. But after that, the demand for research and innovation increased after the as a sort of that pandemic spending freeze sort of thawed out. There was this huge surge in demand.
Why do you think that is?
I think that people, there's a lot of budgets that were frozen but not cut during the pandemic, and so when that sort of freeze has stopped, people are like, what we're going to spend it on? We've got to spend it on innovation. So there was massive overhiring of researchers, and I think there was probably a few too many sort of innovation and research related projects just happening, and it was amazing. We had sort of 2 of our best years ever, like crazy money, and I was just thinking, I've worked it out. Like I've nailed it. I'm a business.
Did you take on more staff there?
No, because I was like, with 2 of us, we're making shitloads. We can manage it. We're doing all of these projects. They're just coming. We're not selling. It's all coming in from referrals, and we're making loads of money. And so, why change a thing? And then 2002 came along, which was a recession for everyone. But it was particularly difficult for people in the world of innovation. And not sure if you're aware, but loads of researchers got laid off. So all of those people that got sort of hired and were being paid crazy amounts in 2021, there was massive redundancies, and it also affected the outsourcing. So people were just not doing as many big research projects as before. And so this like gravy train that I thought I'd created started to slow down, and then suddenly we get to the end of 2021, early 2022, and just realizing that it's not going to pick up. This pipeline isn't going to suddenly just magically appear out of nowhere when it has always done that previously. There would be always someone would come out of the woodwork and and I would be turning down work. And so, so I think there's a couple of mistakes that happened there. One was just assuming that demand grows constantly. Um, you know, you that's a naive mistake. You have to learn from it. Um, I I think that there's always a need as a consultant, services business, that you have to be looking for the next kind of projects, adjacent work, different kinds of projects, and that's something we started doing. So started branching out, thinking about other types of clients. Actually ended up working a lot with other agencies, so white labeling for bigger agencies and partnering with them on projects where they needed help in the research, but actually it gave us access to their clients who we didn't have access to. Also been looking at things like teaching and other sort of adjacent areas that that are also create network and pay opportunities. So definitely lots to be done there. I think that the other mistake was relying on referrals and just kind of assuming that inbound was just going to come. And so I ended up doing research. I ended up going to speak to all my previous clients, the big ones, the ones that were great projects before, and just saying like, are you still outsourcing research, and like what kinds of projects and who, and if not, why not? And they weren't outsourcing. They were saying that actually the kinds of projects that we specialize in, they want to do that in-house from now on. And if they were going to outsource, it would have to be for a very specific reason. It would have to be because you have a massive specialism in like a particular area, or maybe like a region or something like that you can that they definitely can't reproduce internally. And so we just realized that we couldn't rely on those existing relationships, and we were going to have to branch out and make new relationships or wake up old ones. And so we had to start learning to market ourselves properly. And I think the third mistake was not involving my employee, my cousin, in the process. I assumed that she couldn't help with selling because I had this picture of what selling is in my head, but actually there's so much that she could help with. And actually that she, by not including her, I was actually just kind of disempowering her from the business. And so she did amazing research on the LinkedIn algorithm and helped us to build this content pipeline and we were posting multiple times a week, and like sort of refining our approach and the timing and the content and the tone and everything about our posts, so that we turned into this LinkedIn posting machine, and it worked. We started getting calls and meetings, and old contacts from 10 years ago were being reawoken on LinkedIn, and okay, I saw this and I didn't realize you did that, and can you come in and show us what you do? And so it worked, and it was a big part down to her. And so actually, she could be commercially involved if I actually thought about it in a sort of bigger picture way. It's that was a big learning moment, but it's led to some positive outcomes.
And how big was that sort of fall from, you said you were earning lots and had lots of clients. What did it go from? So like, how many clients did you have? And then what did it go to literally zero?
It didn't, it did in the sort of period of a quarter. Yeah, it went to zero. And then in terms of the kind of yearly income, it dropped by, like in that first year, it probably dropped by a third.
Right.
And then since then it's been we've had to fight for every single, just to kind of keep it at that level. So there was me assuming it was just going to go up by 10%, 20% each year, but instead it dropped. And so when it drops by a third, and you think it's going to go up by a fifth,
Mm.
it feels like, even more, because it's like dropped below your target. Where you are below your target is even more. So it's kind of just a really painful feeling for sure.
Was that kind of like a scary moment? Did you kind of, start wondering what you were going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I had an employee, and I was thinking, how am I gonna be able to afford to pay her, and to pay myself? And so certainly you're going through all of that thought process of like, what are we gonna do if if it doesn't start coming in? Um, and then when the work did start coming in, there's these kind of milestones that you hit. Like once I covered her wages, then that's a great great place to start, and then start to get to a point where it's like covering acceptable income for me, and then beyond that point, it's then it's sort of bit by bit you chip away, and you have these small victories.
The sort of referral thing and the I suppose business development, lead generation, was that because there was complacency around the referrals? Did you ever have any kind of plans to do other lead generation?
Up until that point, no, I was just letting it happen, because it always did. There would always be a project, and like really fun projects coming in from interesting clients.
So was that complacency then, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Mm.
And yeah, complacency that won't happen again.
Because referrals is obviously that is a great way of getting clients, and in some ways the easiest way, because they're probably going to be the warmest leads you get, right? And but it's dangerous to have a single point of dependency on anything, sort of lead generation wise, because if that's why you hear people talking about generating mailing lists now, for example, because people are concerned that if their Instagram or their Facebook gets hacked, then all that data and those accounts, however many followers they've got, might not be usable anymore. But at least with a mailing list, for example, it's your data and it's your asset. So, yeah, was that ever in your thinking, that you had a single point of dependency on those referrals?
Yeah, it became a realization that this was, um, you know, very risky. It wasn't like an organized referrals process. It wasn't like a kind of something that I was, fueling or controlling in any way. It was just happening. And people would be like, "Oh, I've heard about you from such and such. Like, can we have a meeting?" And now I'm using a proper CRM, and I have a proper pipeline. And so all of those conversations are being tracked. I'm following up and setting reminders and tasks, etc., etc. So it's become a much more serious sales operation, even though we're still small organization.
What did you learn about yourself during these moments of setback and challenge that we've been discussing today?
I think I learned that I'm like, obviously it wasn't great. It's not been great in both of these moments, but it didn't kill me. Um, and so and I managed to dig my way out of them and end up, you know, in a good place. And so it's probably it's given me a bit of confidence that I can kind of solve problems and kind of dig my way out of issues. And so um my own in terms of my own resilience, I feel more confident about that for sure.
And in terms of, I suppose, advice, what advice would you give to listeners out there who might have experienced a sort of significant setback, challenge, failure within their business?
I think the way that I found that has made things easiest for me is to consider everything to be an experiment. Um, it's a mindset that I learned from. I think there was someone at Google was talking about it. I think someone at Google X, which is Google's sort of experimental arm. and they everything for them is experiments, and when you're Google X, some of these experiments have completely uncertain outcomes, but you can still control the variables and the time, and think about what's the experiment, what's the question, what question am I trying to answer, what am I, what will give me confidence that I've answered that question. And so rather than worrying massively existentially about your long-term goals and value and outcomes and how it's going to affect your life, really just focusing on like what's the experiment that you're running, and what are the next few steps to move that experiment forwards. And so for me, as a research consultant, the measure of that is just do some projects. And if as a bunch of people I spoke to, researchers who'd been made redundant, a couple of years ago, and they were thinking about coming out and being freelancers, or running small research businesses like mine, and they were, I completely empathize with it. They're massive over planners, so they're like, it's going to be this, and it's going to be called this, and we're going to specialize in this. And my advice was just like, that's great, but just do 10 projects. Do some pieces of work, get them done. Try not to commit to really, really long projects. Try to keep them short so you can get more done. And then learn about which ones made you feel really good. When did you have like a good vibe from the client? When did you feel like you were really flowing with the work? Which ones do you regret doing? But it's fine. Like, it's totally fine. And if there's a project you had to do to make some money and you're not proud of it, that's fine too. Like, these are all just kind of steps in the process. And then suddenly you've done 10 projects, and then you can look back on them and you have all of this data to use to form your values and principles. You can think about who you are, what kind of project you are best at, what you can specialize in, and you've got the receipts, you've got the case studies. You can go back to those clients and say, can you give me a testimonial on that? Can you help me find 10 more people like you? And so it's just much easier to do all that thinking and make all those decisions once you've got the evidence to look back on. So stop like making plans and just try and like get things rolling. And then, once you're into that first project and you probably have a bit of spare time, you can maybe make some plans, but you're making money and you're already on the way. And so I think that's the mindset that's always helped me to get over myself, and to not worry too much about where this is all going, just to focus on, plowing through the work, getting it done, making sure from the client's perspective, it's the best work that they've ever encountered and that they've had a, really good experience. And then thinking about what I've learned from it, what I can take away, what I can build on. Did I enjoy it? All of these things.
No, I think that's great advice. And I think some of that planning is essentially procrastination, driven probably by fear of not actually wanting to do the thing and taking that plunge. So it's easier to plan and put it all on paper and make a nice website. That's just that. For me, that's just procrastination. So I think your advice about actually taking some action and then seeing what it's like is definitely, great, advice, and a really good step forward for those people. So, final question: if you could go back in time and erase that initial business failure from happening, would you take that?
No way. It's essential. That there have been multiple failures in my life. I got thrown out of university, for example, and they all have shaped who I am and ended me up in a place where I'm really happy. Things are definitely not. I'm not out of the woods, but I'm just happy with where things are going, and the work that I'm doing gives me great energy. A lot of the time doesn't feel like work. And I just feel like that's the ultimate, outcome. And super lucky, not everyone has that. Some people are trapped where they have, massive financial responsibilities, and they have to work in something they don't like doing because they have to pay the bills. And so it's such a privilege. And I'm like youngish and healthy. And so, zero regrets. Everything has added up, not necessarily conveniently, but it's all added up to the successes I have now and the perspectives I have now. And it makes me in these situations, if they come up in the future, I'll know how to handle them and how I could, behave differently. So no regrets.
Amazing. So we always end on a quick fire round. So short questions and short answers. So question 1, failure is?
An opportunity to learn.
Great. What's your life's mission?
Making people smile.
What's one piece of advice that you'd give to other people on your deathbed?
Something along the lines of, don't try and make everyone like you.
Name one habit that keeps you resilient.
I think just reflecting on how good I have it.
If you could be immortal and live forever, would you take it?
Yeah.
And why?
That I could do more projects.
If you could swap places with any other business person in the world, who would it be?
There's what's his name? There's the guy that invented the AeroPress, which is coffee maker. He also invented the Aerobee, which is the frisbee thing. He's just like an inventor, and I love the idea of being an inventor.
Get And is there someone you could recommend you think I should have on as a guest?
Maybe you should have my business partner and get his side of the story and see whether what his story is.
No, that could be a good one. Link me in, and that'd be a good counter conversation. So, Andrew, where can people find you and connect with you?
2 places. So my company website is muirwood.co.uk. So that's where you can access my services if you want to do some research projects. But I'm also a advocate for a community called Ilios, which is YLEOS, which is a community for researchers who are navigating this kind of changing world where, we're all being made redundant and technology, AI is kind of nipping at our buds. And so we need to, to reimagine what that world looks like. So those are the 2 places, ilios.com and muirwood.co.uk.
Great, and I'll put all of that in the show notes. So, Andrew, thanks so much for being here. Some fascinating kind of stories and journeys that you've been on, circumstances that you faced. So thank you so much for all of your honesty and some great practical advice for people to take away. So, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Jez. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Fail. Really hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Please do subscribe to the show and leave us a review. It really does help us to grow and to reach more people. Do follow us on social media too. We're at Jez Wood on Instagram and at Beyond the Fail on YouTube and also on Linktree. Thanks again and see you soon.